All right, peace, y'all. Welcome, everyone. My name is Nino Brown. So happy to be with y'all. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And y'all just heard a excellent song by one of my favorite music groups, Dead Prez. The song is called Keep On Learning. And thank you all for joining us today for our book launch, Revolutionary Education, Theory and Practice for Socialist Organizers. And we're going to be talking today about the launching of this book, the importance of this book for the revolutionary struggle in the United States. And we're going to hear from some authors and activists and everywhere in between about the importance of the book and its usefulness for the class struggle. So if you're on Instagram, you can follow Liberation School at Liberation EDU. If you're on Twitter, you can follow us at Liberation EDU. Same thing as well. And without further ado, I'm just gonna get started in our program. So, peace, y'all. Again, my name is Nino. I use he/their pronouns. Organizer with the PSL and editor of Revolutionary Education. First, I want to thank the Liberation School Committee, all the comrades: Derek, Noah, Curry, Gabriel, Hannah. All the comrades who helped to make this book a reality. Some of them are with us here, and we're going to hear from them. So give it up for those comrades. And this book was put together by the Liberation School Committee. The Liberation School Committee runs the Liberation School website, liberationschool.org, if you haven't been there. It's an educational site for activists and fighters created by the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And it's maintained by a core of editorial, collective of PSL members who are committed to providing political, historical clarity to the burning issues of our movement. This socialist digital school is for the PSL, but also for friends and other progressives and revolutionary activists. It provides us with, in addition, in-depth articles, analyses, interviews, party documents, and in general, Liberation School features a growing number of educational resources to help a new generation of revolutionaries learn Marxism, to study and apply Marxism to their conditions today, and to make revolution. As a popular slogan that I was taught growing up in this movement, the socialist movement, is that we have to turn thinkers into fighters and fighters into thinkers. And that really sums up the essence of what we try to do in the PSL and in Liberation School Committee as well. So we're going to hear from activists and authors today, some who have written chapters in the book, who are activists themselves. All the authors are activists. And we're also going to hear from folks who are in the PSL and have read the text and applied, some of the principles and practice, or reflected on how this book can enrich their revolutionary practice. So that's kind of the run of the day. We're going to hear from these panelists, and we encourage folks to leave comments wherever you're tuning in, to share this stream right now, whether you're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, and spread the word. So without further ado, I'm gonna get into a little bit about, more why we're here and what kind of motivated the text. And then we're gonna hear from some of our panelists today. So word. So revolutionary education, theory and practice for socialist organizers. So we know as revolutionaries that we have a major task ahead of us, making revolution in the belly of the beast, the capital of capitalism, the United States of America. And this is no easy feat, and it's going to require revolutionary theory. As the adage goes, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. And oftentimes, revolutionary theory is written off as so-called academic or out of touch, or out of reach, out of grasp for the working classes. But for us as socialists and revolutionaries, we understand that theory is really just the crystallization of the lessons of the class struggle, right? Distilling the pain, the anguish, the victories, the lessons of the class struggle to a workable theory that we can use to build on. And Marxism is a living theory. It doesn't, it's not static. It grows when it's applied. And, to say that we can do without revolutionary theory in the times that we live in is to essentially disarm ourselves. And our theory, revolutionary Marxist theory, is not just what Marx thought or what Marx said or what Marx and Engels wrote, but really the principles, the concepts, the pedagogical stances, and the numerous struggles that have flowed from that, from Cuba to Korea to Brooklyn to Compton, right? It's not just the ideas of Marx, but the principles, the concepts, scientific socialism, historical and dialectical materialism that is a weapon in the class struggle that we apply wherever we are. So in 2016, the PSL identified as one of our primary tasks being to restore the ideological continuity that we had with the socialist and communist movements that shook the world in the 20th century, from Cuba to Korea to Vietnam to China, all over the world, really. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, this ideological gap opened up, and it weakened the revolutionary and progressive forces all over the world, especially in the imperial core, in the United States, France, UK, what have you, Germany. And when we founded our party in 2004, we knew that socialism would rise again, right? Out of the ashes of capitalism, out of its own failures to solve the unemployment crisis, the houselessness crisis, the climate catastrophe, right? All of these objective factors that are outside of the control of revolutionaries would contribute to the revival of socialism. And to prepare for that revival, we decided to train, to build a party, to educate ourselves in the lessons of the class struggle, to promulgate the lessons and principles that have been defended by workers all over the world for at least a century. Now, these objective factors that are largely outside of our control are important, but what do we control? Not the objective factors. What we do control is the subjective factor, the level of consciousness, how well read we are, how experienced we are, how organized we are, how mature and battle tested are we as a revolutionary force, the working class, but specifically the PSL, the party, right? So we know that the revolutionary forces in this country are not going to fall from the sky, right? They are going to be made up of the everyday workers, like Chris Smalls from the Amazon Labor Organizing Campaign, who was written off as inarticulate and unintelligent, right? Those are the folks who we turn to organize, to transform into activists and organizers, into revolutionary socialists. We know that in the United States, a socialist revolution will be fundamentally different than other revolutions which took place in a semi-capitalist or colonized context, right? To win here in the United States, the advanced capitalist countries, we believe that we're going to need to build a movement, a mass movement of and for explicit socialist consciousness, right? Socialist consciousness will not grow on its own. It requires the organized and intentional efforts of an expansive base of militant organizers who are equipped to intervene in a variety of campaigns and movements. And such organizers are not only activists, but also educators. They're not just fighters. There are some of the most intense fighters that I've met in my life, but also some of the most intense and reflective thinkers that I've also met in my life, right? So we're not just organizers or activists, we are deep thinkers, but also the strongest fighters. And the reason that we published this book is to facilitate the training of new generations and ways of revolutionary organizers and educators right? We want to be popular educators, popular communicators, and first and foremost, servants of our class. And this book is a measure to facilitate that process of training more and more revolutionary organizers and educators. So this book is a contribution to the revolutionary struggle. We hope that you buy the book, you discuss the book with a friend, form study groups, what have you, but we're going to hear from some of these activists and organizers and authors of the text, Revolutionary Education, and how do they relate to the text? Whether they wrote a chapter, they're activists, and the book resonated with them and illuminated their own organizing or related to their own organizing. And we're going to hear from some of these activists today, and we're going to really enjoy ourselves, really, because education is a joyous affair, expanding our consciousness to deal with the immense enemy that we're against, right? Capitalist imperialism in its rapid decay and decline. And as we said, we know it's not going to fall by itself, and hence why we are here, to shake the tree, as Che Guevara taught us. The revolution doesn't just happen. It has to be launched by people imbibed with consciousness, with will, with passion, and revolutionary theory. So we're going to hear from our panelists, starting with one of my comrades, Kari, who is also on the Liberation School Committee and also wrote a fantastic couple chapters in this text on Vygotsky and Amilcar Cabral, one of my favorite African revolutionaries. And then we're going to hear from some other comrades, Esteban, Patricia, Noah, Jane, Rosa. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to my comrade Kari to open us up and talk about his chapter, how he relates to this text, and the importance of this text to the revolutionary struggle. So go ahead, Kari.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Nino. I really appreciate it. It's such an honor to be here and so exciting to be able to talk to you all about revolutionary educational theory and the practical relevance for us as organizers today. So in the few minutes that I have, I want to talk about Vygotsky, Lev Vygotsky, and his contributions to educational psychology, revolutionary educational psychology, Marxist educational psychology, and its practical relevance for us today as organizers. So I think the first thing that I'd like to say about Vygotsky is that one, so he was a Russian educational psychologist, and he graduated from Moscow University in 1917. And I think that that's significant for obvious reasons. The Russian Revolution was such an inspirational factor in his own intellectual development and his own understanding of education and psychology, that really kind of offered the context for really the significant work that he did. And just like as a side note, I think it's telling that the work of Lev Vygotsky has really transformed the field of education really throughout much of the world, in the US in particular. Of course, the more revolutionary aspects of his work have been sort of removed, and those are the pieces that are really important for us that we want to bring back and that we bring back in the book, and I'm going to talk a little bit about. But I think it is telling that it was a Marxist that has played such a significant role in education, even within the capitalist world. A little bit of a side note, but I think really, really relevant and important, and helpful for us too, doing our outreach and talking to people, because Vygotsky's name is so known within education. It offers a really useful bridge in meeting people where they are at. And another important piece from Vygotsky in and of itself that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But I think like the main piece that I wanted to focus on is the way in which Vygotsky really revolutionized our understanding of cognitive development, of intellectual development. He really like changed the paradigm. And what he was pushing back against was this idea of biological predetermination. That is, that our intellectual capacities are predetermined at birth, and we sort of mechanistically move through these predetermined stages of development. And Vygotsky, through his research and through his experiences in the world, Vygotsky says no, that's incorrect. Cognitive development is not primarily biologically determined, but it's mediated and driven by historical factors. So rather than biological for Vygotsky and for us, the historical piece is significant. In other words, Vygotsky is not so much interested in individualistic conceptions of cognitive development, but collective conceptions. And what determines the cognitive level of development are these historical factors, including a society's level of technological development and other ideological factors such as racism, sexism. Vygotsky himself was of Jewish background and was almost not admitted to university because of his background. And so, after the success of the Russian Revolution, Vygotsky is very, very excited, ecstatic, because of the unbounded potential that he saw in terms of the cognitive development of people once the barriers of capitalism, all forms of bigotry, racism, sexism, once all those barriers are removed, the possibility for our development really has no bounds. There is no biological predetermination setting limits on what we can achieve. So, Vygotsky dedicated his life to the success of the revolution and was very excited about the possibilities that could be unleashed when these barriers are removed. So that, I think that's the first piece, that our understanding of cognition is not necessarily biological, but really primarily for our purposes, historical. And so the next question is then, well, what can we do as revolutionary organizers to facilitate this process educationally, to facilitate this process of development? And Vygotsky, he coined this phrase called the zone of proximal development, which for him was sort of this pedagogical tool, in other words, this educational tool then that we can use in our organizing. So Vygotsky is talking about, all right, well, the first question is, what is our actual level of development as a class? And we can assess, as organizers, we can assess our actual level of development through outreach, through organizing, through our engagement with our class. And so that's the first step, is assessing. And, it's important too for Vygotsky, like political development is not linear. It fluctuates with events. It ebbs and flows, it rises and recedes. 2 years ago, during the uprising against racism, the political development of our class was at a heightened level. And that provided lots of opportunities for us. But it shifts over time for various reasons. So, but once we assess the level of development of our class, of particular communities that we're working in, like I said, through outreach, through talking with people, through talking with as many people as we can, then we have a sense of, okay, this is our level of development. What's our zone of proximal development based upon our understanding of what our actual level of development is? And for Vygotsky, that's the important piece. That's the most important piece of information, is what we are able to achieve or accomplish with the help of more competent peers. That's the role of the party. That was the role of the Bolsheviks during the Russian Revolution, when Vygotsky was looking at the level of development of Tsarist Russia, the vast peasantry, peasant-based society, illiterate, backwards thinking, and the role of the party in during a revolutionary crisis, playing that role in terms of being able to achieve more collectively through the help of more competent or differently situated peers than what we can do by ourselves. And so that's the role of that's the educational role of the party, is that ongoing assessment in terms of being able to know where we are at in terms of our political development, so we can best create educational experiences to be able to further move our development and move our campaigns and actions toward the ultimate necessary direction that we're heading in. So, I mean, that gives us a little bit of sort of an idea of Vygotsky's contributions and what that looks like for us in terms of organizers.
All right, thank you, comrade. So now we're going to hear from Comrade Patricia Gorky. Go ahead, Patricia.
Hello, thank you. It's really an honor to be here today with the authors, with the panelists, and with all the people who are tuning in, whether on YouTube or these other platforms, and on this important topic. So I had the honor of being able to write a review for the book and to read it before it was published. And education is such a critical part of the work that we do as socialists. You know, recently Reuters published a poll that had falsely claimed that 74% of people in the US would support the US establishing a no-fly zone over Ukraine. But that same poll shows that the majority opposes US airstrikes to support the Ukrainian military. So what is a no-fly zone? Well, a no-fly zone would mean that US warplanes shoot down Russian planes. It means the US bombs Russian air bases and military installations. It's a declaration of military war against a nuclear power. So most people don't know what a no-fly zone is. And in fact, they would actually oppose such a move. And we have a real task of winning people over and away from escalation and war. There's, within the book in Revolutionary Education, there's an interview with Frank Gonzalez, the director of Cuba's Prensa Latina news agency from 2006, where he was interviewed by Gloria La Riva, and where he talks about how socialists must be able to explain the class character of all the events. And we have to give people all of the keys needed to be able to interpret those events. The television, and certainly this was true in 2006, and certainly this is true with many kinds of media today, of social media and otherwise, of television overwhelms us with images. But that same media denies us the space to interpret those events. Some of those images are outright falsehoods. Some of them are portrayed in ways meant to confuse us. And in the end, of capitalist media really leaves people with nothing but confusion. And if you've ever turned on CNN or Fox or MSNBC to try to get a sense of what's actually happening, if anything, I'm sure we've all experienced this of just feeling overwhelmed and confused and freaked out about the world. So what is the US doing? Most people, just based from this poll, most people would oppose a no-fly zone. And they're not looking for war with Russia. But in fact, the US is escalating. The US is sending thousands of high-tech and advanced weapons into the Ukraine. They're carrying out economic and cultural war against more than 150 million people in Russia and Belarus, and of course, and of all the discrimination that's also happening against them in other countries. So the US government knows what a no-fly zone is. They know the implications of the economic war that they're carrying out. But the US government doesn't care about Ukrainian people. They certainly don't care about Russian people. And we can actually see that the US government doesn't care about the entire working class population of the entire world. So we have a real task here of winning people over away, again, from this escalation and from this war. And we have to be able to explain to people what is the origin of this crisis, of the US and NATO, of how do we persuasively explain, how do we win people over? What methods should we employ as socialists when we're speaking to workers or students or perhaps trade unions? We would want to take different approaches based on each people that we're working with. But we have to win people over by explaining and by educating. You know, Nino earlier mentioned that socialist consciousness will not grow on its own. So how does it grow? It grows when we win more socialists, when more people are won over to revolutionary socialism. Because socialism is the doctrine of the working class. And by doctrine, we mean the set of core principles that we operated on. And the root of the word doctrine actually means teaching and learning. So there's that fundamental element as well. And so what is socialism? We live in a society that's divided on the basis of the hideousness of caste. And Vijay Prashad, in a previous interview, had talked through this. And why is that? You know, we see that hideousness in every facet of society. There are tens of millions of people facing eviction. The richest country in human history, tens of millions facing eviction, millions without access to healthcare, hundreds of thousands denied housing, and forced to live in misery, whether out on the streets. You know, I live in San Francisco, and here you can see the giant Salesforce Tower. Meanwhile, people forced to live in all manners of indignity. We see schools closing, the military budget continually increasing, and more police being pumped into the streets. But there's no shortage of houses, there's no shortage of medicine, there's no shortage of schools. And there's not even a shortage of money. In fact, we have extreme surpluses of all of these. Capitalism is unspeakable luxury that's based on the foundation of human misery. Capitalism means that a tiny select few live in that unspeakable luxury. And you know, you never see the truly rich. Their lives are private, they're completely hidden, and so you never actually see that the separate society that they live in. Only here and there we get glimpses into it. They own and control the factories, the algorithms, the land, the machines. And socialism means that working people, the poor, the wretched, the people with calloused hands, people who are working 2 to 3 jobs, people who are working 50, 60, 80 hours a week for less and less, people who have no choice but to work, who have no option to not work. That is working people. And socialism means that working people plan our economy to put power in the hands of the working class to meet human needs, to proportion out houses according to how people need, building as many schools, and using all of the data that we have about our societies to know that we need a school in each neighborhood within 3 miles. We need to plan the roads to make sure that people are able to walk. We need to make sure that we have grocery stores for people. This is what socialism means, is a society where working people are planning for our needs. And it's socialism, it means a struggle that's based on class unity. And we get that class unity by smashing racism, sexism, transphobia, and bigotry that divides our class. And that really only exists to divide our class. We're a big reason of why, because you can't have capitalism without racism. You can't have this tiny, tiny fraction that owns everything while all of this misery is continuing on and people's lives are getting worse. And half of the people in this country, in the United States, live in poverty. Half of people in this country live in poverty, live paycheck to paycheck, will not be able to accommodate if an accident happens or if a $500 expense happens. Half of the people in this country. And we know that things can be different, and we know that things need to be different, that we need a new society that's based on equality, and that society is called socialism. So we have to be understood. We have to win people over. We have to educate and explain. And Revolutionary Education is just that book that goes through and explains from different facets of whether from practical tips of or how do we organize study groups, how do we understand and probe into current events, or whether also examining and breaking open, Curry had brought up of Vygotsky, and really of smashing the old views of intelligence, of understanding that we all actually have the capacity to grow and develop, and we all have the capacity to learn. So I highly recommend, please, if you haven't already, buy Revolutionary Education. Share this with your friends. Education is a core part of our work.
Awesome. Thank you, Patricia. Definitely fired up hearing you speak. We have a duty to meet people where they're at, but not leave them where they're at. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Comrade Noah to share their takeaways from this text. Go ahead, Noah.
Awesome. Thanks, Nino. And thanks, Patricia, and to all the other speakers. My name is Noah. I'm an activist and organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. I'm based in the Bay Area. And I'll premise my spiel by saying I did not contribute any chapters to the book. I do help out with some Liberation School tech stuff, but I'm here to share some takeaways from the book from the perspective of someone who is reading it and looking to apply its concepts to sort of day-to-day organizing practices. And I guess I'll start by building off of something Nino was talking about in the introduction, which is that our party, the PSL, is premised on the firm and fundamental belief in the actuality of socialist revolution in this country. We don't only believe that it's possible, but we believe that it must be. That being said, it's the masses of working people who really make history and who make revolutions. It's impossible for any political organization to meaningfully wrest power from the capitalist class using secretive means that leave those masses uninvolved from the process, right? It's sort of a losing formula. So the question is, what do we do? And one of the primary goals of our party at the moment is building the movement for socialism, as Patricia was talking about as well, and really honing that movement's organizational and ideological aptitude, truly moving people in the millions towards socialist revolution, because that's what makes socialist revolution actualizable. And of course, the party plays a key role in this as leaders and educators in the movement. But I'll talk about that later, that type of education is not like a one-way street like it often is in capitalist society. But I'll get to that in a second. So to really move people in the millions, we think education is paramount, like Patricia was talking about, right? It's crucial and it's extremely important. But the good news is, and this is one of my key takeaways from the book, is if you're already doing some organizing, you're already doing some education in some capacity, right? I think chatting with a prospective member who may be new to socialism, explaining the implications of a no-fly zone, as Patricia was talking about, explaining the implications of sort of any political goings on that maybe you're like passing out a flyer to somebody, but also speaking at a demonstration or even just conducting a party meeting. These are all forms of education. And this book is really meant to be a sort of comprehensive handbook for strengthening and honing our expertise in revolutionary education and making us better organizers, really, and by being better educators, because really as activists and as organizers, we are educators, inevitably. We have to be effective. So the other thing is, no matter your general sort of educational expertise, if you are, whether you're a newer organizer who's not used to kind of persuading somebody to, or sort of explaining a concept to somebody, or whether you are a professor who does that for a living and who sort of explains concepts to people for hours a day in a classroom. Regardless, there's always room to improve in your understanding and sort of ability to educate in a revolutionary way. So quickly, before I pass it off to some more of our speakers, the other thing I want to touch on that I think is really important to take away from this book is the distinction between the approaches to education, like a sort of a bourgeois approach to education and a revolutionary approach to education. Paulo Freire, and Derek Ford talks about this a little bit in chapter 2, but Freire, I'm really bad at pronouncing his name, but he talks a lot about something called banking pedagogy. And that is sort of the predominant form that we see, that's the predominant sort of approach to education we see under the capitalist system. And what banking pedagogy is it sort of sees the flow of information in an educational practice as a one-way street, right? Where the educator, the teacher is like a bank of information and the student is like a sponge, right? And the teacher transmits education, the student receives that education, or the teacher transmits information, the student receives that information, and that student doesn't transmit any information. And it's really a truly one-way street. And I don't know, it's unrealistic and kind of sad to think about it that way, but that is really kind of how education works in capitalist society. Many of us have grown up in the school system here, and you can say that's how it works. Revolutionary pedagogy, on the other hand, or revolutionary education, or some may say a pedagogy of the oppressed, is a two-way street. It blurs that boundary between teacher and student, and whereby through the process of educating, the teacher is being educated, and the vice versa is true as well. As the student is educated, they are educating the teacher. And this is really what we strive for when we talk about revolutionary education and why we should study this book. Because what I was talking about before, examples of how day-to-day organizing life is, we're educating all the time. We're not trying to do a kind of banking pedagogy approach, right? For example, if we're chatting with a prospective member, we're not trying to just like force information on them and throw information at them as fast as possible. That's not effective. What we're trying to do is create an environment where we're both learning and we're both meaningfully contributing. So that's really what I wanted to touch on. Definitely pick up a copy of this book. I think it's really important to study, especially right now. I had one more thing. Oh yeah. So a lot of the sections and pieces of this book are available in audio format too. I know it's pretty difficult. Many of us are working full-time jobs and organizing really hard in our time off of those jobs. So, and also for accessibility purposes, you can check out Liberation Audio on SoundCloud, Spotify, anywhere you can find podcasts. And they have a lot of the pieces that are in this book and a lot of great other content as well.
Word right on. Thank you, Comrade Noah. So we're going to hear now from Comrade Jane Cutter, who is a veteran comrade of the PSL. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Comrade Jane.
Thank you so much. It is really exciting to be here, and it really is an honor to be part of this project. And I so appreciate what the speakers that have gone before me, talking about Vygotsky, talking about Freire, talking about the practical applications of this work. And I just wanted to kind of reflect on a couple of things and how it relates to my chapter. First of all, what Noah was just talking about, that reciprocal relationship of teaching and learning is so important. It's a dialectical whole. You don't have just learning off by itself or teaching off by itself that somehow exist independently of each other. These two things are dialectically linked in a process. And this is may sound harsh, but I mean, if I'm a teacher and my students aren't learning anything, did I really teach? So I have to always be on the lookout for those learning opportunities for myself, to learn more about the learners, to learn from the learners, to learn more about teaching. There's so much to learn when you're an educator. And as people have emphasized several times, as revolutionaries, we are also educators, whether or not we're educators by profession, we're still educators in the community and in the struggle. And I was thinking about what the great talk that Curry gave on Vygotsky. And today, if you go to school to become a teacher, you learn about Vygotsky. But when I went to school to be a teacher in the late 80s, you didn't learn about Vygotsky. In fact, I was sent out into this classroom with very inadequate preparation, to be perfectly honest, about how to teach. No theory. Theory was seen as useless and impractical from a teaching perspective. But when I went to graduate school, I did learn about Vygotsky, and I was already, of course, at that time, a Marxist and a revolutionary. And it was like, wow, it just opened up so many ideas for me at that time to understand Vygotsky. So I think it's very important for us to understand that. But there's, we talk about some of these other great revolutionary pedagogues, if you will, in the book. But there's other people who aren't really part of our Marxist tradition who've also studied education in a scientific way and have important insights that we can benefit from. And I think that's what I wanted to do with the chapter that I wrote, which was to situate kind of a popular concept that's been floating around in education, although it's similar to some ideas that existed earlier that are kind of coming out of more the cognitive tradition. And this was the idea of mindset and the idea that we can create learning environments that encourage students to be more optimistic about their own capacity to learn, rather than feeling that they're kind of limited by factors like, so-called biological intelligence. So I don't want to get into the whole concept of mindset. I think it's pretty well explained in the chapter. But I think we can always learn more about the process of teaching and learning and how to be more effective, even from people who are not themselves revolutionaries. We can still learn from them. Just as when we struggle around the environment, we can benefit from studying the work of scientists, some of whom are not themselves Marxists, but we can still learn about climate change from these scientists. And understand, or climate change solutions from scientists, even if they're not socialists. So I think, for me, the biggest part, the value of this book and this process is that to understand that we're all teachers, we're all learners, that there's almost an infinite amount we can learn about the people that we are hoping to bring forward, that it's vitally important that we meet people where they are, that we not assume that anybody is, that we shouldn't give up hope on anybody or write anybody off as having potential. We need to meet people where they are and try to advance them, and that there's a science to that. And it does vary from person to person or situation to situation. And we don't always hit the mark, right? As educators, we don't always hit the mark. It's okay. We can learn from our challenges and continue to hone our skills. So we have to be kind to ourselves, but also hold ourselves to the standard of continuous improvement, that we can learn and we can continue to develop, just like our class as a whole can learn and can continue to develop. And it's vitally important that we do this, because really the future depends on it, if you will. So I think that's all I really have to say. And again, it's very exciting. It's very validating, to be perfectly honest, of our beliefs when we went to start Party for Socialism and Liberation, to see all of you here today on this panel, and hopefully all of you that are listening at home or watching at home, that things are very different than they were in 2004. And hopefully in another 20 years, they'll be even more different. Thank you.
All right, right on. Thank you, comrade. Definitely invigorating to hear from one of our veteran comrades. And as a former public school teacher myself, I will say that they did what they did to Vygotsky, what they did to Dr. King, just really tried to rob him of all of his revolutionary content. So glad that you wrote that chapter in that book. And now we're going to pass it off to Comrade Rosa and then Comrade Walter. So Rosa, whenever you are ready, go ahead, Comrade.
Yeah, thanks, Nino. And thanks so much to Jane and all of the other panelists for being here today. This is just really honoring to be part of this really incredible event, launching this really incredible book that means so much to me as an organizer. So yeah, as Nino said, my name is Rosa Astra. I'm an organizer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation here in Oakland, California. And just to sort of give an overview of some of the areas of organizing work that I've been involved in here, just for context, I've been an organizer of a Liberation News study group that we organized. I've been involved with our Cancel the Rents campaign here in the Bay Area. I have done some militant journalism and contribute to Liberation News. And there was also a Red Books Day event that we put on here just recently that I just want to mention because I think that there's some connections there. But so one thing that's just like so inspiring to me about organizing, about being an organizer and being a member of a revolutionary socialist party like the Party for Socialism and Liberation, is just seeing the transformation in myself and other comrades in what we're capable of and in what is really possible when we work together and learn from each other and organize collectively. Just for myself, for my time in the party, I've learned so many skills, so many practical things, and just gained so much confidence in the way that I'm able to speak confidently about socialism, organize street meetings and study groups, talk to people during outreach, and these are all skills that I considered myself way too shy to ever develop at one point in my life, and I often see this now with newer comrades who lack the confidence to speak compellingly with members of our class and win people over to the socialist idea. They might think that they're too shy, that they're just like not really like articulate enough or not like a people person or whatever. Again, I kind of felt this way once too. And it was really through the experience and the guidance of the comrades that I learned how to do this. And, now I find myself joking sometimes with the newer comrades, I promise you, I'm more shy than you are, and I could figure out how to do this. So, I believe in you, and let's walk through like what's difficult about this and how to develop these skills and build this confidence so that we're able to do these things. And I think that in studying this book, I really came to this kind of mind-blowing realization that, all of these things that I'd kind of noticed in my organizing work, that I'd sort of seen anecdotally, piece by piece, in the course of organizing, that all of these things are really connected by this cohesive theory of revolutionary education, to use the title of the book. All of these like moments of political development are formalized and described through the theory that is laid out in this book. And I think that's something that has been so powerful for me as an organizer to see in reading through this text and studying it with comrades and seeing the ways that it actually applies directly to the organizing work that we do. And I think that, there's kind of a key realization there, which is that, liberal ideology or bourgeois ideology, the things that we're sort of taught by default in this society, are in many cases really meant to obfuscate and confuse I think, Patricia hit on this point really well when she mentioned the poll about the no-fly zone and how, according to the poll results, so many people support a no-fly zone, but then according to literally the same poll results, it's clear that they don't even understand what that means. And this is in contrast to the socialist ideology, which is really meant to clarify and to elucidate. And it's really amazing coming from one to the other, seeing the way that so many things just immediately become clear and become comprehensible in a way that they weren't before. They fall into place in a structure that allows you to really see the whole. And so just to kind of touch on some of the pieces of that are found in this book. As Curry was saying, in the chapter on Vygotsky and the zone of proximal development, there are really important connections to this concept, both in the development of our comrades and also in outreach conversations and just talking to members of our class. It's really crucial to understand that no one's understanding or consciousness is static, that these are things that really develop through practice and through experience, and that, you can learn new skills, you can gain new confidence, you can become a better organizer by working collectively with people who are more experienced. Actually, honestly, you become a better organizer by working collectively with people who are less experienced and learning the unique things that they do bring to the table, and learning through showing an example of how to do things that they don't yet have the confidence or the skill or the knowledge or whatever is necessary to be able to fully do. I also really appreciate the reclaiming of the mindset theory and the concept of the growth mindset. I think we hear about this theory in capitalist education and the capitalist workplace so much, and it's done in such a disingenuous way, frankly. And I really appreciate the way that Jane's chapter on this really puts together the way that this is actually applicable to our organizing work. To see the dialectical relationship between study and presentation, and the ways that how we approach our class when we are investigating a problem, and then how we approach having conversations with, in many cases, some of those same people when we go back to present the results that we found from it are deeply interconnected. So, I know my time is running short, so I should go ahead and wrap up here. But the thing that I just really appreciate so much about this book is the way that it makes clear the fact that organizing work really is pedagogy in a really crucial sense. And pedagogy is inherently political. There's no such thing as apolitical education. There's no such thing as education that is divorced from a class character. Education, pedagogy, just the having conversations with people about the way that our society is structured are either from the perspective of bourgeois, liberal, capitalist ideology, or they're from the perspective of working class and socialist ideology. And that's something that that is really crucial to understand. So I just want to wrap this up with a quote that I heard from Chris Smalls, one of the organizers of the new Amazon Union, which huge shout out to everyone who was involved in organizing that. But at the press conference yesterday, some journalists asked if he had anything to say to Jeff Bezos, and what he said was, "We just want to thank Jeff Bezos for going to space, because while he was up there, we were signing up people down here for the union." And I think that's just so crucial. That attitude is exactly what we need. Whenever wherever we move among our class, we need to be talking to the people, winning them over to the socialist idea, signing people up to the idea of fighting for a socialist program. So thank you so much, comrades.
Word, right on. Thank you, comrade. And definitely shout out to Chris Smalls and the entire Amazon labor union, right? And Jeff Bezos for saying Chris is inarticulate and unintelligent. Well, building a labor union takes a lot of intelligence and fortitude. So shout out to the workers. So next we're gonna pass it off to Comrade Walter Smolarek, who's based out of Philly and wrote a chapter on dual power. which is a term that has been more prevalent in the left these days. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it up to Comrade Walter.
Hey, comrades, thank you. Thank you, Nino. Thanks to all the other panelists. I'm so excited about this book coming out about revolutionary education because so many people are hungry for ideas, for new ideas about how things can change in fundamental ways, how things can be radically different. And so the need for revolutionary education in society and the need for organizers who are trained in revolutionary education is greater than ever. And I think this is because the unjust and brutal nature of this system has been made so clear by the events of recent years. For one thing, there's extreme inequality in society. Just speaking of Amazon, right? The unbelievable wealth that people like Jeff Bezos have amassed when so many people are suffering, struggling just to get by. Poverty is increasing, hunger is increasing, homelessness is increasing. The complete failure of the government to do something as basic as preserve people's lives amid the pandemic, that about 1 million people have died in the United States, vastly disproportionate to the population of the United States. Something like 4 times the average. That's the death rate in the quote unquote richest country in the world. The epidemic of racist police terror, the uprising in 2020, exposing the white supremacist nature of the system and galvanizing struggle against that white supremacist system on a historic scale, and so many other things. Climate change, the wave of bigoted laws being passed targeting LGBTQ people in states across the country, massive rates of deportation, the Supreme Court preparing a historic attack on reproductive rights, on abortion rights, and especially in the last few weeks, the threat of war, the threat of imperialist war instigated by US imperialism in Ukraine. And that could even become World War III. It could become a nuclear war if the United States were to do something as reckless and escalatory as imposing a no-fly zone. So in this context, revolutionary education is so important, but it needs to go beyond simply exposing the nature of the system and to actually affirmatively put forward an alternative vision. How could society be different? How could we organize the production and distribution of necessary goods in a fundamentally different way? How could we make sure that all people enjoy equality in society and that people's basic rights are guaranteed, the right to housing, healthcare, education, all of the basic things you need to live a dignified life? How can we reorganize international politics so that it's organized on the basis of peace and solidarity rather than war and profit? How do we save the planet from the impending climate catastrophe? Revolutionary education needs to compellingly put forward answers and a vision to all of those questions. So the chapter I wrote, like Nino said, is about base building, serve the people activities, and how that's distinct from the Leninist conception of dual power. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we conduct political education in the Philadelphia Liberation Center, which is the organizing project that I've been involved in, and other members of the Philadelphia branch of the Party for Socialism and Liberation have been involved in for about 4 years in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, North Philadelphia. So when we opened the center in 2018, we said, we want to do 3 basic types of things. We want to conduct serve the people activities to meet people's material and also recreational and cultural needs so that we can build relationships, build a reputation for organizing project. And on the basis of those relationships, identify sites of class struggle, which was one of the other principal tasks that we had for our work as the Liberation Center, to conduct, to organize and conduct class struggle in the neighborhood. And political education was our third fundamental goal, fundamental type of activity that we conducted at the Philadelphia Liberation Center, the socialist community center that carries out all sorts of activities, specifically in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. And since then, our organizing efforts have expanded to other parts of the city as well. So, one way that we incorporate political education into our mass organizing work, our base building work is pretty straightforward. So, we conduct study groups about different local issues, the state of the school system, for instance, or the budget, what the police are doing, like study groups on topics, reading groups where we study a particular text. Like one of the first activities we had political education activities we had after we opened the Liberation Center was a study on W.E.B. Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, and film screenings too, which include a political discussion component to it. That's probably our most well-attended form of political education events that we carry out. But I also wanted to talk about how political education can be incorporated into all aspects of our work as organizers, as socialists, as revolutionaries. So a few examples. One of the first successful events that we conducted was a back to school supply giveaway, where we would give out, backpacks, pencils, binders, school supplies for kids. And we would, in addition to, doing these things and, having kids activities, family activities, we had agitational speeches at the event. The state of the school system in Philadelphia is absolutely horrible. It's underfunded, under-resourced, completely abandoned by the city's elite and the city's government, and also hazardous from a health perspective. I mean, it's physically falling apart. There's lead and asbestos. So we would agitate about these things as we conducted a Serve the People activity. We would conduct political education as part of this event. We also organized, about a year after that, we organized a block party, and the political theme, the political education theme this time was housing. Kensington is being targeted by gentrifying developers and banks. And so we produced a pamphlet about the situation in the neighborhood and the fight for the right to housing in the neighborhood. And we also had agitational speeches in addition to, a bounce castle for kids, again, family events, free food, that kind of thing. Finally, I wanted to talk about an event that we had at a community garden in South Philadelphia called the Community Healing Garden. So it was founded by an important neighborhood leader in the area in South Philly. Her name's Boogie Rose. She founded an organization called Society's Roses. And we got in touch with her through two Serve the People activities that we conducted. The Unity and Survival program, which was a food and supply distribution network across the city, launched in response to the pandemic, and also through a vaccination outreach campaign that the Liberation Center organized. So we had this relationship with this important neighborhood leader, a well-known fighter. And then she invited us to be part of this community garden project. So the Community Healing Garden was founded actually after Boogie found a dead body in a vacant lot. And so she wanted to bring the community together on a positive basis in the face of rising violent crime. So we were part of this project. And then the Community Healing Garden was targeted by a developer. This section of South Philadelphia is also being targeted for gentrification. And so this fight to physically save the lot where the community garden is in is connected with this broader struggle for the right to housing. And so we had a film screening at the Community Healing Garden of the film Gaza Fights for Freedom. It's made by Abby Martin and Mike Preisner and the Empire Files. It's a really fantastic film about the struggle of the Palestinian people. So shortly after the struggle began to save the community garden, we held this film screening there. It had the effect of both bolstering that struggle, bolstering the direct work of this community garden, which is so important for that neighborhood, and conducting political education about a crucial international event that's of high importance to the working class struggle all around the world, the struggle of the Palestinian people to be free. So I'll just leave that there. Again, I highly encourage everybody to check out this book about revolutionary education and really grapple with all of the important questions and issues raised within it.
Awesome. Thank you, Walter, for those visceral examples of real life organizing, applying theory to practice in Philly, very applicable to beyond. And without further ado, last but not least, we're going to hear from Comrade Esteban to talk about, more about the book. I believe you wrote a review of the text, and our lead organizer out in Atlanta. So without further ado, here you go, Comrade Esteban.
Thank you, Nino. Thank you, everybody, for participating in this and putting this on. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak today about our experience and how we view the new book from the PSL Revolutionary Education. As Nino said, my name is Esteban Hernandez, and I'm a member of the Atlanta branch of the PSL. When I personally first read the book, I was actually on my way from Georgia to Mississippi. We were preparing for a demonstration outside of the GEO and LaSalle Immigrant Detention Centers in Monroe and Jena, Louisiana. Because at that time, we had just got word that immigrant women had launched a hunger strike against the inhumane conditions they faced while incarcerated. They were not allowed visitation from family. They were given a horrible diet and their bodies were breaking down. This is why we demand an end to racist mass incarceration and the legalization and full rights for all immigrants in the United States. But while reading the book on my way there, I found myself reflecting on all the organizing and activism that I had participated in over the years. I thought of all the different tenants meetings I had been at, late night meetings at cafes in different cities, all the picket lines and strikes and protests against racism. And I saw how education and theoretical discussions were a thread through all of these actions. How at every meeting, there was a political education opportunity, whether I knew it at the time whether I knew it or not going into it at the time. It was inescapable. This is what we need to understand about the PSL's new book, Revolutionary Education. That the book pushes us to seriously reconsider how we as organizers and activists are living up to our task of carrying out political education. When you're an activist, a lot of the time you'll find yourself running around from this meeting and going to that action and running all around. And that's good. That's very much needed. We have to do that. But as the book shows, there can be no revolutionary movement without political education and revolutionary theory. If we as activists and organizers neglect to live up to the serious political education work that's needed for our movements, we will have failed. This is one thing I've always loved about the PSL. We take seriously the political development of our members in the community. For myself included, I owe the party for helping me to understand the political and economic movements that shape the world around me, and how the working class, when organized and politicized, can change things. The book also gives us a hard reminder on humility and the role of socialist organizers. Throughout the book, we're reminded to never write off people based on an assumption that they cannot grow and expand political consciousness. We're challenged to re-examine the assumptions we have made about who can be brought into our collective. As organizers, we understand people from the working class itself are potentially revolutionary and together are the most powerful agents for changing or even ending the system of capitalism. In a chapter titled, quote, "Comrades Made, Not Born," by Jane Cutter, who recently spoke in this meeting, she wrote, quote, "As an organizer, I have met people whom I frankly doubted had the capacity to become good comrades based on how they presented when we first met. Despite what I saw as an uncompromising attributes and prior experiences, some individuals were willing to participate, take on new tasks, accept criticism, and keep trying. These activists became real organizers by developing skills and habits of mind, such as discipline, self-sacrifice, humility, investigation, compassionate listening, and more, end quote. Today across the country, organizers and activists who fight for a better world are debating how to strengthen and push their movements forward. Our success will depend not just on the correctness of our ideas, but on our ability to share these ideas with other working class people who want an end to the problems everywhere in our communities in capitalist America. A recent example happened that gave me a lot of encouragement. Patricia just spoke in this meeting about the PSL's work on pushing back on the overwhelming pro-war messages in the capitalist media. Recently in Atlanta, while passing out anti-war literature at our Speak Out, members were invited into the house of a young man who had just been discussing the topic with his friends. At first, he actually disagreed with what we were saying, but over time, he came to appreciate our politics and dedication and understand better the anti-imperialist position. He thanked us and was interested in coming around to our political discussions. He also taught us much about how he views the world and how the people he knows were looking at things. I want to thank the writers, editors, and everyone involved in making this book possible, because it's aimed at helping people like myself who are militant organizers. They tried to think about what we need as organizers when putting this together. In the back, they even have a practical chapter with tips on how to construct study guides. We want to encourage everyone to read this book, but not just to read it, but to use it in your work. This book is a tool for us who are committed to the struggle against racism, capitalism, imperialism, and patriarchy. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Esteban. So that is all of our panelists. I also wrote a chapter in the book, and as comrades are speaking, reminded me of some of the work we're doing here in Boston. One of our members, their son was sexually harassed in school, and the school administration's response was, well, you know, boys will be boys. And we protested, organized with other mothers, other community members, and now we're actually trying to create a curriculum on sex education and consent, because that's what's not being taught in the schools. So really, furthermore, just underscoring the point that we each have something to teach, we each have something to learn. This revolutionary and socialist consciousness is not gonna fall from the sky. It has to be an intentional and collective endeavor. We each have a responsibility to lay brick by brick the system, or brick by brick the movement that is going to overthrow this system. And as Comrade said, it's not enough to just be correct or to have a so-called correct theory. It has to be tested. It has to be spread among the masses. And we know that we live in an anti-intellectual culture that abhors deep thinking, right? Everything is super, super short-sighted, as Kwame Ture would say. We are taught, from birth that capitalism provides us with these